Hello and welcome to Alternatives. I'm Al DiGiacomo, and today we're going to be taking a tour of a traditional maple syrup manufacturer, a maple syrup farm. And with me is Dr. Gary Hartung. Dr. Gary is a doctor of chiropractic medicine, and in his spare time he enjoys indulging himself in the laborious art of traditional maple syrup making.
Yes.
Gary, thank you for allowing us to come up here and giving us a tour of how maple syrup is made the only way?
That's it. The only way to make true maple syrup is collecting the sap and boiling it down, which we'll show you today.
How did you find interest in the making of maple syrup?
Well, when I first purchased the property here about 4 years ago, I knew I wanted to do something in agriculture, some type of farming.
Uh-huh.
And being up at this elevation, we're over 1,200 feet here. It's mighty cold, and it's hard to raise livestock unless you're here full time. But I have a southern slope farm. It's all graded downhill, and I've got a lot of sugar maple. So I looked into that and got a lot of information. And
Well, we've had some extreme weather conditions this year with the lack of rain and a not so cold, not a severe winter. Has that affected the yield in maple syrup this year?
Well, this is my third year in producing maple syrup, and it is my best year to date. Although I couldn't tell you whether it was a great year or not, because I don't have enough years under my belt to really know. I think it was a fair year, though.
Okay, so we're going to start the tour. What is our first step, Gary?
Well, our first step is to go down to the roadside tank and check how much sap we have in there. And then we're going to pump the sap up from the road, which is about a 600-foot distance. We're going to pump it up to this tank here, and then we're going to fire up the evaporator and start boiling. Before
we do that, will we be seeing on where the sap comes from?
Absolutely. We can give you a demonstration of how we tap the trees, which we did about 5 weeks ago, and that's how the sap goes into the road tank. So we'll go ahead and show you that.
Well, that's wonderful. I guess we're heading up this way?
No, we're going to actually going down toward the road.
Okay.
All right. Let's do it.
I'll follow you, Gary.
Come on, Brian.
And what is that called, Gary?
This is actually what we call the spile. This is what goes into the tree, the hole that we're going to drill. This goes into the hole, and this brings the sap into what we call the drop line, which is the dark blue. And the drop line, of course, goes into the branch line,
right,
which then goes into the main line into the storage tank.
And the other method, the old-fashioned method, would be to put an actual spigot banged into the hole?
Oh boy, where it all started, if you want to go back that far, the Indians used to use an axe, a little axe, a hatchet.
Okay.
And they used to wound the tree that way, and they'd have a wooden, chopped out wooden barrel, if you will, or bucket, and they'd collect it that way. And then, of course, it wandered down to, they used to use a bracing bit, and now we're using
cordless drills.
Cordless drill, which is the best way now.
Yes.
This is a standard wood bit. There's special bits, but I utilize a standard wood Irwin bit. It's a 5/16 drill bit. And what we're going to do is I have a stop on there, so we drill about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, depending on the bark of the tree.
Right.
This is a young tree. It's got thin bark. It's not perforated. It's not sticking out on us. So we're just going to take a hole, and we want to keep it as level as possible. So basically what we're going to do here is bore a hole. Whoops, our bit came out. That doesn't usually happen. And that's the hole, if you can get a shot of that.
Okay, and then your device?
Then this, of course, this tee here, this plastic tee would be in this branch line, as you see the other ones are. And we just take it, and some sugar farmers use a hammer to tap it in. I use my hand. We start in as a horizontal angle, and we work it down to a vertical, and that's it. That's a tap tree.
Well, all right, Gary, this is the roadside collection tank?
Yes, it is.
And we've seen some of the sap that is flowing by gravity?
Yes, natural gravity.
What's the capacity on this holding tank, Gary?
This is a 1,000-gallon holding tank.
Mm-hmm. And how many trees have you had tapped this year?
I don't know the exact number of trees. I have 500 taps. Some of them are multiple tap trees. Some of them have up to 3 taps, some are 2, and of course some are 1 tap.
And what kind of yield did you get this year?
Well, so far we're approaching about 100 gallons of finished syrup, and it's the sugar content at this time is running about 1%, which is pretty low. So it's about 50-55 gallons of sap to 1 gallon of syrup ratio.
Wow.
Season's about finished up. As you can see, it's running very, very lightly. It's just dripping in. This is natural vacuum, but in a moment we'll go on, turn the vacuum on, and you'll be able to see what's in the lines anyway. This is the sugar maple, the hard or sugar maple. There's also a maple, the black maple, and some of them are crossed between the black and the sugar. And that's the 2 main maples you'll tap for maple production.
And does it get strained before it goes into the tank?
No, actually it doesn't. We do that straining when we pump this up to the first tank that you've seen. There's a filter material that it goes through to enter that tank, and then of course when we evaporate, it's getting cleaned up as well.
I see. Well, how long will this stay on for, Gary?
Well, it's set on I just had the master switch off, but it's set on a thermometer. So when it gets below 32, it automatically shuts off. When it gets up to 38, it automatically turns on. That's when the syrup will run and when it'll stop running at freezing. So this here cylinder, what we call a mechanical releaser, will fill up to about halfway, and then it'll get tripped, that stainless steel float, that large float you see, that'll trip it and it'll enter in, and then it'll start the cycle up again. We're running about 21 pounds of vacuum here.
Okay, and now I guess our next step would be?
Next step is we're going to turn the switch on to take the sap that's out of here back to our gravity tank, to where we'll start evaporating, start boiling.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're about I'd say about 1,500 feet up from where the vacuum is down on the road, and just so you can understand, I'm going to take a tap out of the tree. You can actually hear the vacuum, and this is not the vacuum is not sucking the sap out of the tree. What it's doing is it's lowering the atmospheric pressure outside of the tree so that the sap will run. In other words, in order for sap to pump out of the tree, the pressure within the tree has got to exceed the pressure outside the tree. It's got to exceed atmospheric pressure. So by putting your main lines or your lines under vacuum, again, you're lowering the atmospheric pressure so that the sap will run when it ordinarily wouldn't run, because obviously the atmospheric pressure changes day by day. So it makes for a much more efficient setup. And that's the vacuum. So we'll put it right back into our sap hole, and they're pretty much not running too good today. It's a little too warm, and we'll hope for the best. I think we're about wrapped up for the season, but we might get another run or two before we end up.
What are the best temperatures, operating temperatures?
The ideal temperatures would be lows at night in probably the upper 20s, even mid-20s are okay. And daily temperature high maybe in the 40, 45 would be a wonderful sap day with little to no wind. If it gets too cold, if it gets too like say 0 or below 0, even in the single digits, even if it gets up to 40 the following day, it won't run good because it freezes the ground too hard. And the snow cover is always beneficial too. That prevents the trees from budding and keeps everything cool. But it looks like this week we might even get some of them buds to open up, and it's going to end the season. This is slab wood from the local sawmill, and nice thing about this, some of it's hardwood and softwood, but it's cut into such thin pieces, so you get a very hot fire. You're not sitting there waiting for the wood to cook. It's already thin and dry and dried out, so you get instant heat out of it because you want as hot a fire as you possibly can get in the evaporator when you're boiling. So the little bit of sap we got today, this amount of wood should do us just fine. Use an awful amount of wood in the season, several cords. You figure about 4 cords of wood for every 25 gallons of syrup produced when you're utilizing a wood-fired arch, which is what we got here.
All right. right, Gary, I guess this is the sugar house, huh?
This is the sugar house, Al. This is the evaporator. This is where we're going to be boiling today.
So this is where it all happens.
This is where the finished product is made, yeah.
Now, in traditional times, how was this process done, Gary?
Wow, well, it all started out with the Indians. What the Indians did is, like I said earlier, they took an axe and they would wound a tree, and they'd put a wooden carved out wooden pot or
collect
bucket,
the sap.
collect the sap, and they would do it one of two methods. So they would put it in a larger wooden trough, and they'd actually let it freeze up over on the freezing nights, and then they would remove the ice. The ice would be the water, and they'd have the sweeter syrup left over as a finished product. Another way they did it was they'd boil rocks over an open fire, and they'd drop the hot rocks into the cold sap, and that would steam off some of the water.
So this was all from an ancient art of sweetening.
Yep.
Sweetening. I hear that beets were a prominent sweetener in the area, and at a time maple sugar.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in the earlier times, back in the 1800s, when there wasn't, before the Industrial Revolution, before there was transportation, before sugarcane was able to come over to the States, maple sugar, granulated sugar, was our mainstay for sweetening. We didn't have sugarcane. After, of course, the revolution, and after the Industrial Revolution, we had the transportation. There was then sugarcane became our mainstay, and then the maple product was back to maple syrup, and that's really what most farmers farm today is the maple syrup. Some still make the maple sugar, but it's not as common.
So what you have here is a high efficiency evaporator?
Yeah, this is what we call an airtight forced air wood evaporator. It's not a traditional vented system. It's much more efficient. If you look at the chimney later when we're burning, you'll notice no smoke coming out of the chimney because we're literally burning all the gases. The way you get heat from wood is you're releasing hydrogen and carbon gases, and a lot of that goes up the stack as smoke. It's actually pollution.
No, I see.
But when you're injecting air and you limit you restrict your exit, you start reburning all those gases. So you're actually burning the gases and you won't see any smoke. It's very, very environmental friendly. Much better than burning fossil fuels like oil for the evaporator.
Oh, great. The concept now with the sap flowing, will we see that later when you hit the valve, or?
Absolutely. You're going to see the sap entering in the flue pan in the back there, in the rear left corner, and you'll see the finished product coming off right to my rear here on the takeoff area.
Do you break it down into some of the stages of maple cream and into maple candy also, Gary?
I don't have the facilities yet. It's not something I've got into. Later, next few years, I might get into the cream. As far as the granulated sugar, the market isn't really there for it, not for me anyway. And it's more boiling and more reducing, and I think
more energy.
Exactly. I'm not ready for that yet. But the cream I'll make probably within the next couple of years.
Sounds great. So we have the high vented evaporation with our coils underneath.
Yeah.
And we have a fire almost ready to be stoked.
That's right. We're all ready to start a fire soon.
That's great.
It's going to go any moment. Here it goes. It's losing all the vacuum. You can see all that stuff stirred up in here. It's all stuff in the tree. There it goes. When you get it dropping in here, this is the transfer pump. It's going to bring the sap from the collection tank to our evaporator tank. One's going to feed the evaporator for us. It'll prime itself. And we're pumping sap now. I'm guessing there's probably about 200 gallons in there. So this is going to follow up this line right across there, probably about 600 feet. Take probably a good 15-20 minutes to empty this tank out. And then we'll finally get boiling. Won't take very long. We don't have much sap, so we'll have a nice fast boil. Hopefully we'll take off some syrup and get to try some on some pancakes if we're doing good. So let's head back up to the sugar house and get started. Well, we're pumping the sap up, and should be about pumped up from the road in about another 10 minutes. It's coming in nice and cold. You don't want your sap sitting too long because as it gets warmer, it does spoil. It's similar to milk. You want to transfer your sap to the tank and boil it as soon as you collect it, as soon as possible, actually.
About approximately how long does it take for that fire to get up to temperature, Gary?
Well, once I get this sight glass on, I'm gonna shut her up, turn the blower on. That's gonna get us to temperature real fast. You'll start noticing a boil. Watch how fast we boil. We'll probably boil within 5 minutes. We're gonna
really?
Boil going, yeah.
5-minute boil.
Very, very fast with the blower. Now, if you look in there, watch the fire start to dance.
Oh yeah, it's just fanning the flames in there.
And it's going to start a hot fire fast. And if you watch up here, we got nothing happening, but if you time it, I don't have a watch on, you'll start noticing steam right in the back of this pan and in the front of this rear pan, which is the sap pan. I should start boiling, start steaming quite rapidly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get my firing gloves on, and when you're boiling with wood, you're loading it depending on what wood you're using. We're using slab wood here from a mill, so we're going to probably be loading every 6 to 7 minutes. Again, you want that fast, intense heat. You don't want to be loading logs in. It's going to take time to cook. You want to just
keep a constant temperature.
Yeah, as constant as you can. So you see those fire that flame starting to get real. Getting to go real good now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start piling up my wood pile here to load for the first
Right, you're going to get
loading.
into production mode then, right?
Exactly, yeah. So we're going to just start moving around a little bit now. So there's our gravity feed tank. You can see it out there. We, of course, pumped our sap from the roadside tank, our collection tank, up into this tank. And now you can see the sap, the cold sap coming in. Gravity, it's taking it in via this float. As we boil off the sap in the pan, this float automatically regulates and takes in the incoming sap. You can see it coming in through here. Okay? So we're going to maintain a constant level. If you ever drop too low, of course you'll burn your pans. And that's a $5,000 pan, so you don't want to burn it. So you always got to make sure you have enough sap coming in here to feed, and you got to know when to shut the fire down. Okay? And if you run too low on sap, you got to go and fill it up with water and back it up with water again so you don't burn the pan. So then the sap enters here. It goes through this copper and it gets warm. From ice cold sap here, it goes through a series of up and down U's, and it comes out here 180 degrees. So, and then it's going to move to the flues in this big sap pan here. And then it enters the syrup pan up in front, which we'll go back up to see right now. You'll notice if you look up on the roof here, Al, the smaller flue to the right stack is the steam stack. You'll notice steam coming out of there. That's the water, of course, we're evaporating off out of the cold raw sap to make the finished product. That's what we're doing. We're evaporating water. That's why they call it an evaporator. But the smokestack, you'll notice the taller one there, the galvanized stack, you'll notice no smoke coming out of it. That's because we're burning so efficiently you won't even know there's a fire in there. You're burning all the gases in there. That's how we get the most BTUs per quart of wood. That's how you burn wood efficiently and environmentally friendly. Wonderful. Let's get back here and make some syrup, guys. Come on, Frank. These are our syrup thermometers. This is when we know when to take off syrup. It's no automated process we use here. We do it by hand. So we got to keep a diligent eye out for our temperature. Right now we're about 215. We're 3 degrees above water boils, and we're about 4 to 5 degrees off where syrup is taken off. So we got a little bit more to go. But every day, these thermometers have to be calibrated before you boil, because water boils at different atmospheric pressure. It's not the temperature. Atmospheric pressure will change the temperature at which water will boil. So they've got to be calibrated. As a matter of fact, today when we calibrated these thermometers, we had to move them 2 notches. So that 2 degrees is a whole lot. So they are calibrated for today's pressure. So we're taking off at the right temperature. And again, we got to keep a close eye on this. We're boiling pretty good now. We got a steady boil in all 4 parts of our syrup pan. I don't know if you can get a good look in here, but we're boiling pretty strong. All right, we're getting ready to take syrup off, so I'm making sure that our columns here are evenly temperatured. A lot of times you can get hot spots when you're not drawing off syrup, and you start getting stagnant hot spots, and the syrup can actually get above syrup and burn in here. So just checking them, and we'll be getting ready to load up the wood there. Set.
What's the next step that you would do to ensure that it's been properly cooked?
Well, actually, we're taking off just under syrup, 1 or 2 degrees under syrup.
Right.
So we don't burn the syrup, actually. If you wait till it gets to syrup, it could back up on you and you could go above and burn it. So that's a problem. So you take off a little light, which we are, about 218 degrees. We have a steady flow. And we adjust it manually. As I see it go up, as I see it go down, I back off or take off more as I need.
Okay.
The next step is to take it from the cone filter through the filter press, which is a series of aluminum presses with filter medium.
So there's a light screen inside here filtering out any sediments or maple
suspended sugars, solid sugars. Yeah, that's actually in this, not in this. So we're going to make sure this is opened up. And we're just going to hit a switch. You're going to see the syrup pump from the bottom here.
Yeah.
It's gonna circulate first. I want to circulate the syrup back and forth. It's gonna fill the lines here.
All right, syrup is circulating.
We're getting close to syrup. We're getting almost right at syrup. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna slowly open this valve. This is the finished product. We're going to bulk contain and put them in bulk containers, and then when we want to jug them or put them in gourmet glass, we're going to take it out of the bulk containers and reboil it back to temperature exactly.
Before
get the finished product, exactly. We're going to slowly open this valve. I want to check our level here. So you see the finished product start to come through very slowly.
So there's a lot of pressure to put it through these plates, is there?
Tremendous amounts of pressure, yeah. This is very thick, as you know, and it takes a lot of pressure to push it through.
Do people enjoy an unfiltered syrup, Gary?
You know, some of the old timers say, "Oh, you take some of the taste out of it if you take all that suspended material out." But really, if you tasted some that was filtered and some that was unfiltered, you wouldn't be able to taste the difference. The thing it does do is, again, it makes it very clear. So when you put it in glass, you don't see any cloudiness or any material left behind. You just see a crystal clear maple syrup.
And how do you rate the different grades of syrup, Gary?
The different grades are rated in a grading test, which is you have some syrup bottled up as grade B dark, grade A dark, grade A medium, and grade A light. We'll take a little bit off today into our grader. That looks like it might be a dark medium. Let's not guess. Let's get it cleaned off and we'll get it in the grader.
What is the difference between a light and a dark syrup besides the color, Gary?
Well, classically, there's a bacteria in the sap that gives it. We're gonna switch the light with the medium. Now, what we need to do is go with the light. So I'm going to turn around here. I want to check our syrup coming off, make sure our levels are good. You don't want to take your eye off of here too long. And we're just going to look out the light. Now it's a little cloudier because there's a lot of air bubbles in there. With the cloudiness, you really can't tell whether we're grade A or grade B dark, but we're definitely a dark amber today, which is fine. Now you had asked what gives it the color.
What gives it a darker color?
The darker color is the mineral content. There's a lot more minerals in the syrup later in the season, as well as the bacteria that gives it its color as well. The bacteria that sits in the sap, and the raw sap, it makes the color get darker as it sits longer and longer. As it warms up and as the sap runs later in the season, you get a darker syrup classically. Usually you make your light ambers in your the first run sap, then it goes into medium, then it'll progress into a dark, and then it turns what they call buddy syrup. That's when the buds of the maple actually open up, they release amino acids into the sap, and the amino acid gives it a very strong flavor. It's an off flavor. They call it buddy syrup.
You had, here we are at the end of our tour, Gary, and you had a little story about a folklore of maple syrup. Do we have a few moments to hear about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. The legend of maple syrup, the way it was not invented, the way it was discovered, there was an old Indian chief that became angry at, well, I don't know what exactly it was that he became angry at, and he took his little hatchet or his axe and he threw it into a tree, and that tree happened to be a sugar maple. And there just happened to be a wooden bowl sitting under that where the wound was inflicted, and the sap began to run because it was late spring and it was a freezing night the night before, and it filled the bowl up. And when the chief's wife was going to cook dinner that evening, she reached for the bowl thinking the liquid that was in it was water, and she made her venison over the fire. Well, she used the water to make the venison, was sap though. And when they had the venison that night, it was tremendous because, of course, they cooked it. The sap became syrup, and it was the best venison they ever had. So they retraced it back, and they found that came from the tree, the sap. It wasn't after all water; it was sap. So that's how it's said that syrup came about.
Very interesting story.
God.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
All right, we're doing good.
Okay, Gary, this brings us to the end here. I want to thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And I think what we should do is we should go on the inside and put some of this maple syrup over some pancakes. So what do you say?
Absolutely. Try it on ice cream, too. It's wonderful.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much, Gary.
Thanks very much for coming out. Hope you enjoyed yourself.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Gary Hartung for his knowledge and his tour on how to make maple syrup. Gary, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
It was wonderful having you guys out, Al. I appreciate you coming, and I'm glad you enjoyed yourself.
And this is where it all comes down to. The syrup is bottled.
Yes.
Right? Some into regular bottles, some maybe decorative decanters.
Yes.
A little maple leaf there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess this is the time where we get to sample some of the ware.
This is my favorite time. Yeah, this is the time to try the pure maple syrup, and I assure you there's nothing like the real thing. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Give it a shot.
Well, thank you, Gary. Well, to close the show, we hope you've enjoyed our show tonight. And we encourage you to contact us with our numbers at the end of the show. So for OKTV and Alternatives, I'm Al DiGiacomo saying, see you next time.